Now, most of us equate generosity with money and resources. So if you have a lot of money, if you have a lot of resources, you have the ability to be a generous person. But in fact, generosity isn't about how much money we have. It's actually a practice that we use to help curb our inclination to keep and settle scores, to put people into boxes, and to claim the good things in our lives as things we've earned rather than been given. Generosity is a posture of our hearts, not about the bottom line in our bank account. It's like a superpower that helps us break the cycles in our lives and world that wear us down and keep us under the heel of old and tired ways of doing life. Generosity is the opening up of ourselves, of our lives, of all that we have. It is releasing the hold that our clenched fists have on certain opinions, certain outcomes, certain resources, and letting them go, offering them up for the sake of the kingdom. We're talking about generosity through the whole month of December, but today we're going to focus on being generous in our thinking, in the assumptions we make about others. But in order to let generosity flow, the first order of business is to be grateful, which was also part of our practice a couple of weeks ago. But I think that just shows how central gratitude is to our lives as humans, and especially our lives as Jesus followers. You see, generosity flows as we practice gratitude. Gratitude helps us to remember that all we have is a gift. The whole basis of our faith is that what we have comes by grace, not just our salvation, but everything we have. Our finances, our families, our friends, even the ability to get up in the morning. If you don't believe that, generosity is going to be hard because you're going to harbor the notion that somehow what you have earned, you deserve it, and it's yours to decide what to do with. But as followers of Jesus, we believe that all that we have comes from God, and that God allows the sun to shine on all people, the evil and the good, because God is so good and gracious. God's kingdom is not a zero-sum game. God breaks all the rules in order to be good to all people, and we are asked to be conduits of this same generosity. We are distributors. We are dealers of this generosity. So your first generous practice is to sit in the generosity of God for a little while. Practice gratitude. Give thanks in all things. I was reminded this summer that Paul does not say give thanks for all things, but in all things. Some of us are in rough circumstances this season, and so I get that you are not thankful for everything happening in your life, but you can be thankful in your circumstances. So practice gratitude every day. Take time to intentionally name and thank God for the really good things in your life. Gratitude opens our hands to receive the provision we need from God. It unlocks those clenched fists, and then it fills our hands with everything that we need plus more so that we can share. Gratitude sends us out into the world on mission to break and reverse cycles. The theologian Karl Barth says this about grace and gratitude. Grace evokes gratitude like the voice of an echo. Gratitude follows grace like thunder follows lightning. And I would argue that we could also say that gratitude evokes generosity like the voice of an echo. Generosity follows gratitude like thunder follows lightning. We practice gratitude, and then we practice generosity. Let me share this N.T. Wright quote to get your imaginations fired up for this practice. Kingdom that Jesus preached and lived was all about a glorious, uproarious, absurd generosity. Think of the best thing that you can do for the worst person and go ahead and do it. Think of what you'd really like someone to do for you and do it for them. Think of the people to whom you are tempted to be nasty and lavish generosity on them instead. Generosity invites us to step outside of cycles that feel inevitable and instead bring something new, something life-giving and energizing. So what would it look like to break cycles that are not life-giving? Well, like I said before, I think it could start with generosity in our assumptions. How could you practice generosity in your daily life? For instance, in your households, with your partners or roommates or children, how would you do your best to assume the best? How would you practice compassion and generosity in your assumptions about the people that you live with or live close to? Could you let your go-to explanation for their annoying behaviors be, they are doing their best, instead of, they're hopeless and everything is terrible and we're never going to make it? It's so easy to make assumptions about the people we live with based on years of calcified resentments and get stuck in old cycles that year after year drain love and compassion. What if instead you made generous assumptions about the people you live with, that you focused on the positive instead of the negative? This is a small thing, but here's an example from my life. I have one son who is very forgetful, like ridiculously forgetful. In fact, one season, the fellow parents on his basketball team had bets on whether he would show up with both shoes and a complete uniform to practices and games. It was a regular occurrence that they would be driving into the parking lot for a game or practice, and one of the Lobberham parents would be driving out to get something our kid had forgotten. He often forgets his binder, his bus pass, his homework, and now, which has really thrown a wrench into things, his mask. Well, about a year ago, I decided that instead of being frustrated about this all the time and getting angry, I was going to make the most generous assumption I could. I decided to just assume that he cannot remember things. He doesn't want to forget things. He hates forgetting things. He's frustrated when he forgets things. And when I get angry and frustrated, it just increases his shame. And it gets us entrenched in a cycle of resentment that spreads into the rest of our relationship. So now I assume that he's trying his best, which he is almost all the time. I tell him that this is just the way he's made. He's going to have a hard time being organized, and that's okay. Everyone has weaknesses. He's just going to have to come up with some strategies to deal with it. It is what it is. So now he does things like he tries to have a mask in every backpack, in every coat pocket, and I have extras in the car. And when he forgets, I don't freak out. If I can help, then I help him. And if I can't, then he deals with it. And this small change in my heart, this posture of generosity, has helped to bring new life into our relationship. I think generosity can reverse and redirect cycles in the world too. When I look at the world and think about one thing that needs to change, I think about the way that we make assumptions about people we don't agree with. We are an increasingly divided society, and we make general assumptions about people based on whether we agree with their opinions on one thing. And then we build those assumptions, by remaining in communities and relationships with people who share those same assumptions. We make caricatures of those we disagree with. And instead of being open-handed and generous, instead of making room for relationship, we shut down life-giving cycles by boxing people in, and instead give momentum to death-dealing cycles of division. Now, we may not be able to change the wide divisions in our country or in the world, but we can do our part in our personal lives to make generous assumptions about those with whom we disagree. And this does not mean that we don't work for change, that we don't demand justice where justice is needed, that we don't name things like racism and abuse and patriarchy for what they are. But generosity makes room for relationship And relationship actually makes room for new perspectives, for the healing of divisions. I've shared this story before, but I love it. I think it's an amazing story of hope. Megan Phelps Roper was a member of the Westboro Baptist Church. Over the years, you may have seen them in the news. They're a fundamentalist group who believes that God is judging America, as evidenced by everything they don't agree with. Megan grew up protesting at abortion clinics and military funerals, and her church and family expressed horrible sentiments on placards outside of places where people were going through the worst moments of their lives. As she grew up, she took over as spokesperson for her church, and one of the ways that she began to share their gospel was to join Twitter and troll people. But as she developed a presence on Twitter, a few people started to message her privately and ask her questions about her beliefs and build a relationship with her. And she now credits these generous responses to her vitriol with her change of heart. She left the church, and now she advocates for and teaches people about how to have conversations with those they don't agree with. And a few years after she left the church, she also married one of the men who reached out to her on Twitter, and they have a family together. Generous assumptions can make room for something new, can make room for the healing of divisions.